Made it out there. That sounds good. Well, thanks, and thanks, Lynn, for I really appreciate the invitation today to share some time with you. It's kind of overwhelming because I feel like I'm in pretty good company today. And so it's this last September at ADP, I gave a presentation. I had a quote from General Colin Powell where he said, "You know that you're a leader when people follow you," which is kind of obvious. But he added, "if only out of curiosity." And after seeing some of these presentations today, I think I'll add his definition of leadership. When I think of Jan Shear, you know you're a leader when people give you a task to do that nobody else wants to do. So Jan has made, I think, a beautiful career. You know, I first was exposed to him in his issues and development of education and managing lameness, and then he left that to an endeavor to solve the next issue that nobody wants to tackle, which was euthanasia and humane euthanasia of animals. So again, I think that really defines the leadership in our role. So it's been great for me. I think while I was in vet school, I had mentors that I still go back to today that I look to for guidance and advice. But it's been great as I graduated back in 2000. Since then, I've met folks like Jan Shear and other folks in our profession that really have provided a mentorship to me and sort of guided my development, whether it's in ethical issues, animal welfare issues, as a veterinarian. So I'll just take notes and thank you. So I think we really are on the same page if I say that the animal welfare audits and assessments are meant to provide assurance to customers and consumers that animals in agriculture are properly cared for. So over the next 40 or so minutes, I think I'd like to explore whether or not we've been successful at doing that and sort of look at some of the hurdles of creating an effective animal welfare program. So we can look at the foundation of our business to begin with. Whether you're a veterinarian, a dairy farmer, or an extension agent, animal scientist, or nutritionist, I think it's important that we all recognize that our ultimate customer is the consumer. And I think the trouble we have reconciling that is the fact that we're actually usually 2 or more steps away from our consumers. So there's a little bit of a gap there. Added to that is the fact that the supply chain is very complex, and our customers, whether it's Wendy's, the Walmarts, or the Wegmans of the world, we have challenges and we have to understand them if we're going to effectively navigate this animal welfare proposition. So when I look at our customers, I lump them into 2 very general categories, simple boxes. The first one is who I call the box checker. The box checker simply asks, are you doing something? And what that something is actually is pretty irrelevant and it works just fine until something hits the Google fan, and then all of a sudden I get emails questioning our efforts. We also find that they want to kick the dairy farmers and their suppliers to the curb. Now with all customers, we do face the constant battle with their CME. And the box checkers are the one, again, who like to Google their way to understanding animal welfare. Then we have the bus driver. Now the drivers not only want to say they're responsible corporate citizens, they act like it. They have a vision of what it looks like to be a responsible corporate citizen, and they're committed to making improvements in the supply chain. They're leaders, and when it comes to that responsible corporate citizenship, they're committed and invested a great deal of resources in developing initiatives focusing on improving the welfare of animals. Now the bus drivers do vary in their welfare knowledge. Some are quite savvy, some are kind of at the beginning. Many of them have invested in and developed their own internal animal welfare councils, and so they look to animal welfare experts, they look to them for guidance, and they actually listen to them. And I'll be the first to admit that when you hear folks talking about being a responsible corporate citizen, you know, everybody's eyes kind of start to roll, and I get that. Okay? And we can sit here all day and we can argue about the true sincerity of those responsibility efforts. But whether it's about doing the right thing or simply trying to be not to be the next bullseye of special interest group, it really does boil down to one simple thing, and that's brand protection. My running joke is that Dean hired me so that they could have somebody to throw under the bus when PETA called. And because it is about protecting the brand. But what many farmers and veterinarians don't really understand or appreciate is the pressure that comes with the critical task of protecting the brand. So whether it's doing the right thing, which means aligning with consumer values, or preventing product recalls, policy, or politics from negatively impacting the brand, risk must be managed or mitigated. Now, admittedly, some corporations and groups manage to introduce their own risks, and whether it's through advertising claims, through public pronouncements, or personal beliefs, or established corporate policies, for that reason, there is sometimes a price to pay, and I get that. But when the price comes based on the actions and practices of your suppliers, it becomes a whole new ballgame, and we really need to understand that. The key to maintaining our license with consumers is maintaining consumer trust. And while some consumer trust is supported by science, some by economics, the foundation of consumer trust is believing that the system is ethically grounded in shared core beliefs about animals and how animals are treated. Core values of fairness, compassion, simply doing the right thing. And when that trust is lost, there are consequences. And these consequences are not inconsequential. We lose our social license, and that makes us less competitive. That makes us subject to greater social control, and that increases cost. You can simply look back to the impact of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act and appreciate that we can spend a little bit of money up front to avoid a great deal more money spent if we don't get ahead of the game. Most importantly, we need to understand that the consequences are not limited to bad actors. So when one falls, the rest tend to follow. So we need to consider that when we start developing animal welfare programs. So what I offer today is the premise that when it comes to animal welfare programs, we can pay now and do it right, but we can take the easy path and find ourselves paying much more later. Some would ask, how hard could it be to implement a good welfare program? And my answer is it depends. When I started this job years ago, I thought it would be fairly simple. That has changed. The first step I think we need to understand is that we already function in what I'll call a trust deficit as an industry. If we look at the social sciences and understand sort of where and who trust is given, we sort of see this sort of setup. If we put the level of trust on the y-axis and businesses on the x-axis, we essentially see this relationship. When it comes to big business, trust is pretty low. Why? Well, that's because consumers see big businesses as being self-serving. That is, we care because that's how we get our best return on investment. And keep this in mind that historically, when we talk about agriculture, our running line is that we take good care of our animals because if we don't, they don't produce the best for us. And that's how that message comes across, as our best return on investment. Then we have compliance-oriented organizations, and those are the folks whose messages we follow rules. Simply follow the rules. I guess government agencies might be the ones that I'd hope are there. And those folks are afforded a little bit more trust. Along the way, I think there's an increasing number of what might be called not-for-profit only organizations. And a good example of those would be the folks in Tom's Shoes, who you pay $60 for a pair of little sandals that you get for $5, but you pay $60 because you know that for every pair that you buy, they're going to give a pair to a child in need in some country across the world. And so those folks are gaining an ever-increasing level of trust in our social effort. And then we have principle-driven organizations there at the end. These are seen by consumers as being worthy of social license. Why? And that is because they are perceived as having a shared value and ethic. Currently, agriculture has no voice in this arena. Some might offer that we have representatives of veterinarians who were given a great deal of trust. But we must consider that if the profession is seen as functioning in this circle of big business, the best return on investment, rather than that principle-driven circle, we not only lose our credibility, we may lose our professional standing in the consumer community and lose that essential trust. and the acceptability of certain practices are not based on how common they are, how convenient they are, or even how scientifically valid they are. Because it is about more than science and more than economics. It is, as Bernie very well pointed out, it's fundamentally about ethics. And we have to reconcile this idea. So our ability to do so will determine our success at maintaining our social license and maintaining that public trust. To be able to reconcile what ethical knowing is not like other knowing, not like science, not meant to define how the world is, rather, it's meant to decide and define how the world ought to be. We can no longer simply ask the question, can we feed cows once a day? Or can I dock tails? We need to ask the question of should we dock tails? What would be considered acceptable is not which passes through the filter of our scientific lab. Acceptable practices must pass through the filter of our social ethics. Because there are simply some things that society needs support. We also need to recognize that good production doesn't necessarily guarantee good welfare, and that we can't defend our practices with penalties. We can spend hours debating how to define animal welfare, but in reality, the exact definition really isn't as important as understanding what it encompasses. As veterinarians and animal scientists, we function quite well in this circle, focusing on animal health. As Bernie has pointed out today, and others have mentioned, that research has demonstrated that this limited view of animal welfare is not sufficient, and we need to consider the animal's nature and their emotional health. To adequately address animal welfare, we have to recognize and value all of the determinants of animal welfare. What are those determinants? Again, we can look at the extent of failure to cope. We can look at abnormal behaviors. We can look at motivation. And I'll admit that some of these we still don't have a good handle on how to measure and how to quantify. But surely if we don't at least fundamentally recognize that they're important, we never will. And so that's where we need to move forward. Make sure that we address these issues beyond basic issues of animal health, which again, I think we're really good at looking at. Bernie brought this little message up today, so I find it's kind of funny. So, just when I think we're kind of getting a handle on animal welfare, I read the very quote from David Warren. Okay? So our animals can't turn around for 2.5 years that they're in stalls producing piglets. Just like Bernie said. He said, I don't know who asked the sow if she wanted to turn around, but the only real measure of their well-being we have is the number of piglets at birth, and that's their all-time high. So when I read a statement like that, and I look at our profession, I look at animal science, I do have to wonder if we've been paying attention to what we really know and understand about animals and animal welfare and what's important. So let's see what the public thinks of this. Am I surprised that Purdue found in a consumer survey of over 1,000 people that HSUS was named the go-to expert on animal welfare? I don't know. My husband quickly pointed out that veterinarians weren't even on the pie chart, okay? And so as the eternal optimist, I noted that there was an other little piece of pie. So I said, hey, we're in the other, surely we're in the other. And so of the other, 215 people that selected other, 140 indicated that they either don't have a source that they go to, or they did not seek information. So if we're lucky, the remaining 75 others were all veterinarians, right? That would leave us at a whopping 7%. That's less than the state, all right? So we're not looking so good. And then we tell ourselves, no, you're the expert. You know, don't worry about it. Animal scientists, veterinarians, you're the expert. So what does an animal welfare expert look like? What did we say back in 2008 after the Chino incident? We said that these images are characterized as deplorable. MVMA executive said that if their allegations are confirmed, that we should have the strictest penalties. Okay? Fantastic. It's so wonderful that the veterinary community, the animal science community doesn't condone these behaviors. solve the problem, they expect that we wouldn't have even allowed it to happen in the first place. We've had a few years since then, so let's see how we're doing. After the 2011 video, the ABP condemned willful acts of abuse. We strongly promote humane care, and this situation cannot be tolerated. Okay? You know, more recently, here we all, it's like Chino all over again. 4 years later, but at least now we unequivocally condemn willful acts of abuse. Okay? That should fix it, right? So should we be surprised that the food service industry and grocery industries are trying to come up with programs on their own that address the issue? I don't think so. Not when all we have to offer is, you shouldn't have done that. Okay? It reminds me of this great Robin Williams comedy skit where he pokes fun at British police officers who aren't allowed to carry firearms. He said, what do you do to a criminal? He said, I guess you yell stop, or I'll yell stop again. Okay? And that's what we seem to be doing. So what we like to stand up and say that those instances don't represent the average. This is what I found on an average day when I visited the slaughterhouse, who handles cull dairy cows. And they said, quite frankly, this is an average cull cow day. 2 out of 7 cows were down on arrival on the trailer. 2 fell down while stepping off the trailer. 1 more was so skinny and weak that she fell down while trying to navigate the system. All 5 were humanely handled and euthanized by the staff. They did a great job. But all 5 should have never been there in the first place. So while we yell stop, corporations that have a branded stake have begun to move the needle. Why? Because they understand the audience. How do we think our message is resonating with consumers and customers today? We condemn behaviors, sure. But what are we doing to prevent it? It's crucial that we understand that for today's consumer, transparency is so fundamental, it's almost become passe. Now consumers want to know not just that we're being transparent, they want to know that we're being honest and authentic, and not just the communication, but in our efforts. So I was hired back in 2010 by Dean Foods because they, like many other companies, recognize that every relationship carries risk. To protect the brand, you have to identify the risk and manage them effectively. When it comes to milk and its products, that means making sure that farmers are doing the right thing when it comes to animal welfare. Doing the right thing even when no one's looking. When I think of animal welfare, I consider it on a continuum, bad, good, great. The first 2 buckets are what I think consumers expect us to manage, and that is essentially making best efforts to assure good welfare. Now the far end is what I would consider standards based on ideology rather than welfare, and I think folks are free to gain their market share based on these premises, but I do not consider any of these marketing strategies a guarantee of good animal welfare. What consumers expect is that we take good care of our cows. Pretty simple. But how do we demonstrate that? The first thing is to understand what good care looks like for today's consumer. Unlike the EU, where welfare programs were implemented in response to concern over food safety and BSE, animal welfare programs in the U.S. have come about for 2 main reasons: risk mitigation and niche marketing. And it's efforts by special interest groups that have aimed themselves at agriculture, focusing on consumer trust, that have influenced further development of these programs. So how are we doing? Today, animal welfare programs tend to focus on the process rather than the outcome. Many programs have created niche markets, making judgments on production systems, driven by philosophy rather than focusing on the cow. A process-driven approach can work, and I think it's important for certain practices, such as tail documents and horning. And for that reason, we need to educate, and we need to develop best practice guidelines. We also need to develop the right outcome measures. But simply measuring outcomes and then telling the farmer how many lame cows he has doesn't fix the problem. The fact is that evidence has demonstrated that animal welfare programs, as they are managed today, don't succeeding to improve the welfare for the average cow and the average herd. They may address the bottom of the industry by setting minimum standards. But keep in mind, we continue to make claims that we're meeting the highest standards. This implies we not only address the bottom end, we have to make the average farm better. How do we improve the welfare of the national herd? Well, I think it takes leadership. I talked a little bit about leadership when I got started. There are lots of programs out there, and I see lots of folks who like to check the animal welfare box. Does a self-reporting survey really amount to assuring animal welfare? Does a voluntary, unenforced assessment assure animal welfare? If I asked any of you today if you're doing a good job, how many of you would really be honest about the areas where you felt you were falling short? I visit with lots of dairy farmers, and I have yet to have one tell me that they don't feed colostrum to their bull cows. I want to believe that, I really do. But how do I prove it? Second, don't make promises you can't keep. Are we really setting the highest standards of animal care? Do we visit a farm and assess welfare to determine that, or if the cows are cared for properly? If we're going there to determine that they're cared for properly, it seems like we've already decided the outcome before we even got started. If we can assure consumers that we're meeting the guidelines, are we implying that there's no need for improvement and that everything is going fine? Well, current published figures would argue that we need to improve if we look at the NOMS data. The farm program currently says we should have less than 10% lane counts. National data would suggest that we have about 25 to 30%. So I'm not sure how we assure farmers are meeting the guidelines. So let's see what happens when folks call our bluff. Assurance. The Humane Society of the United States filed a legal complaint with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission asserting that Tyson Foods is making deceptive public statements related to animal well-being. Specifically, Tyson claims to audit its suppliers for conformance to the Pork PQA program, the Pork Quality Assurance Program, which is absolutely no mandated or enforceable animal welfare standards to conform to, making audits, meaningful audits of the program impossible. Simply put, animal welfare programs today have been designed to make consumers happy and the farmers happy. What can we do to make consumers feel good while not upsetting the farmer too much? Until a program puts the cow at the center of the conversation and allows the animal welfare experts to define what is or isn't important to the welfare of the cow, programs will continue to be viewed as industry-driven, having no real teeth, at best not effective, and at worst not genuine. Next thing, don't tell me what you think I want to hear. This one drives me crazy, because I get email messages all the time from our industry trade groups that give me handy little messaging tips if I'm ever asked by consumers about certain things. So when asked about dehorning cattle, I'm supposed to say dehorning is a practice that's been used for decades to help reduce injured cows and animal handlers. That's great. I can say that with a straight face. Cow horns can become dangerous weapons, blah, blah, blah. I agree. Dehorned cows are less aggressive and less dangerous to transport. I'm right there with you. How about this? Dehorning is typically conducted the first couple of weeks of calf removal. Well, if we look at the NOMS data, the average age of this body is 7.6 weeks. Not a couple. And that makes it significantly more painful. For a cow with developed horns, dairy farmers and veterinarians follow best industry practices that work to ensure comfort and safety of the animal through sedation and anesthesia. Currently, less than 20% of the cows are provided pain relief for this procedure. This budding is a fairly simple procedure that doesn't require anesthesia. Research shows that at any age, it's painful, and at any age, cows benefit from pain relief. Lastly, the National Dairy Farm Program provides guidelines for safe and humane ways for cattle to be disposed. Again, assurance. Sort of. This is a voluntary program with no actual requirements. They're merely suggestions, and they're not enforced. Learn from our mistakes and the success and failures of others. This pretty much goes hand in hand with the previous guides. Lastly, make it simple or meaningful. Do we have to visit every farm and provide every farm with tools of how to do better? Or do we just need to make sure we identify farms that are increased risk and struggling and spend more time with them to help them do better? How do we ensure that the average farm gets better? Our success will depend on how well we do all of this. But in doing so, we need to make sure that we do it with integrity. And I think that means we follow these principles. I think we have a great opportunity in front of us to leave a legacy of compassion. So let's look at where we are today. Tail docking is a great example. Make it meaningful and stop making excuses. The common cry from agricultural industries is that we want guidelines that are science-based. Some programs even claim that these science-based guidelines must be enforced. And we look at the industry communications and we read things like, tail docking is done to increase and protect udder health. We hear that it's done in humane ways with anesthesia. All the science suggests that that isn't true. National programs, while they don't recommend tail docking, they don't prohibit it. Yet the MVMA, ABP, National Mastitis Council, and the Canadian Code of Dairy Practice each expressly oppose the routine tail docking of cattle based on the welfare implications to the cow. Illegal in California, being phased out in Ohio, tail docking is simply an unacceptable practice. So why is it as an industry we really discourage the practice? Is that the best we can muster? Are these programs really focused on improving animal welfare, or just satisfying consumers, not upsetting the farmer? Is this really the commitment to the highest level of fairness? Now, I'm happy to report that the National Milk Producers Federation recently announced that they, too, would no longer support tail docking. Fact is, they're recommending that we phase it out over 10 years. That doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. 10 years? And then I'm reminded by several people in co-ops who tell me that they have no intention of observing that rule. Because why? The farm program is voluntary and not enforced. When we get down to it from a corporate or industry perspective, these programs are developed as a means of risk mitigation. Because it's no longer enough to simply do the right thing. You do need to do it. Transparency, accountability, authenticity, and honesty are key to success with today's consumer. And it has a significant impact on how these programs that were previously viewed as corporate responsibility have the potential to become a liability. Why is that? Well, let's look at the definition of risk management. Okay? The definition. Identification, assessment, and prioritization of risk. Let's look at the asterisk. Risk can come from uncertainty in financial market, project failures, blah, 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 legal liabilities, as well as deliberate attacks from the adversary, or events of uncertain or unpredictable root cause. When I look at how some of these welfare programs have been developed and implemented and communicated about, I have to wonder if we saw the little asterisk and we were paying attention. Seems like we've either forgotten or we've actually failed to realize that words matter. We've forgotten what poets and shamans and healers and sorcerers have known for millennia. Words matter. That the difference between the power of a curse or a blessing is contained in words. So we have to be careful of what we promise. We have to be careful of what we say. And when we make that promise, we better be sure we can back it up. A leader in the industry recently told me that the problem with the industry setting its own standards is that they get a bunch of producers and their favorite veterinarians in the room, and what they consider to be normal practice today and call that improving welfare. And I think he was right. That's not improving welfare, solving the problem. It's burying your head in the sand, becoming stagnant and irrelevant. Back in 2010, this reporter got it, because she saw what was at stake. She simply said the important lesson for managers here is that when you're trying to play the consumer trends, it's best to either do it all the way or not at all. Half measures and weak industry-generated standards aren't going to fly, and may come back to bite you. So when I read this, do I get nervous? Are we really providing consistency and uniformity to best practices in a program that's voluntary and not enforced? Then I read this, and let's be clear, the third-party verification end of the farm program does one thing only, and that is to verify whether or not the information gathered is accurate. Compliance to any of the guidelines is not required for participation. So this, without doubt, is a misrepresentation. And again, when consumers see this, we lose trust. Funny thing, when I first started working for Dean, when kind of talked and visited with my family and was trying to explain to them what I was going to be doing in this sort of next phase of my career, they were all confused and didn't understand why I didn't want to be a vet anymore. And so I tried to explain to them what I was doing with these and how I'm still a vet, I'll always be a vet, I'm just being a vet in a different way. And apparently I didn't do a very good job of explaining it because my grandma was still a bit confused and was still looking like, what is she doing? And my dad finally figured it out, and he looked at my grandma and said, Evelyn, she gets paid to worry about cats. And apparently that makes sense because my grandma looked at me and said, oh, yeah, you're good at that. So I am good at worrying about cats. I'm good at worrying in general. So why do I worry? And I do worry because of this. I do think that welfare programs today are designed to make producers happy and consumers happy. They're merely window dressing. I'm worried that we haven't invested enough in educating both the people who are doing the assessments and the farmers at what the expectations are. We need to create the right mindset for adoption over volunteerism. I am concerned and I'm worried that there is currently zero accountability. We need reliable outcome measures. And again, working with Dr. Shear, we're helping redefine what these outcome measures should be. I think that all of these programs ignore life stage specific animal welfare. All of these programs are very cow specific. We don't focus on the calf nearly enough. And we know that we have some serious welfare issues in dairy cows. At the same time, I think we don't need to be so prescriptive that we limit farm diversity. We need to recognize that there's a million ways to get to good animal welfare, and I'm not as concerned about how somebody gets to good welfare. I just need them to get there. And every farm is going to get there in their own way, and I don't want to limit their opportunities to do that. I also worry if we're missing something. I'll readily admit that lame cows, calf care, and whole cow condition are probably the biggest risk when it comes to animal welfare. But when it comes to affecting the welfare of dairy cows, I wonder, how do we address stocking nutrition? Because while 30 or 50% of the cows may be lame on a single farm, 100% will be negatively affected if we have poor stocking. So what are the effects of stocking nutrition? How do we measure that, and how do we affect positive change? And I think we've had some great examples today of how we can do that. And I'm excited to see what we can do in the future, and I'm excited what Merck's offered as a tool for us to help dairy farmers train their staff and make sure that we address what I think is a critical issue in the dairy industry. So I've been critical, and that is the easy part of these programs. But how do I think we can solve this problem? I think we can create an effective, well-managed animal welfare program that actually puts the cow at the center of the conversation. I think we can verify when and if animals are cared for properly, and that our producers are striving to meet contemporary standards. I don't tell our customers that everyone's perfect. We can identify areas that need intentional improvement, and we can have them develop plans and make sure they're implemented. We can set benchmarks. We can educate. Most importantly, we can document the efforts so that we're questioned publicly. We have the evidence to back up our claims of what we've been doing to address the problem. We're not there yet. I think we need a program that can do all of this, and I have hope that we're on the right path. The fact is our customers are already way ahead, and if we as a profession and an industry are going to remain relevant in the animal welfare conversation, we're going to have to sprint. Not run, but sprint to catch up. I think we're obliged to treat these animals in our care with kindness, not because they have rights, but precisely because they don't. Because they stand before us unequal and powerless. For all that these animals give us, I think we owe them the respect of a good life and a good day. I think that's what consumers expect. And if we don't accomplish that, that trust will be lost, and it will not be given back. So with that, I'll steal Lon's quote, and be happy that I think I answered a little bit of this. We have time for questions. So thank you very much.
Any questions?
You mentioned that we need standard practice. Who do you think should create these standards of practice, and why is it that we don't have?
I'm not you. I think that our veterinary profession needs to work together with animal welfare experts. Because, let's face it, veterinarians are not animal welfare experts. We are animal health experts, and there are a handful of veterinarians who have accomplished a great deal in animal welfare, who I think deserve that recognition, who I think can consider themselves in that small circle. But we need to use that perspective, animal health, animal behavior, to form these standards of practice. And then we need to recognize that as a veterinary, we're a veterinary profession. And I think we need to embrace the idea that with professionalism comes a standard, and accept the fact that we might make some of our colleagues uncomfortable by saying, this is how we expect you to behave. And we don't tend to like that. Having moved to Texas, I really appreciate that people really don't like that. We are a profession. And there is a standard that I think we should all be held accountable to. For the very reason that I think the public does give us a great deal of trust, without question. And if we expect to maintain that trust, I think we need to behave accordingly. But I do think it should come from our association.
Other questions?
Yes?
Who do you see as enforcing any of the practices, and who decides that? I mean, I think in the industry, we've had a lot of issues where it comes down to money, unfortunately, and people aren't going to do it if they're not rewarded. I think the BST issue was an issue where a lot of people were willing to sign on the dotted line that said they weren't going to do it, and they stuck to that because they're honest, good people, but they're worried their neighbor's still using it. And I just don't know how we get around those kinds of issues without some kind of, enforcement that's pretty severe or whatever it is.
Yeah. So the question was about enforcement and how you do this, and I think you're right. I mean, again, a voluntary program isn't going to provide assurance. I go back to that Princess Bride quote, big assurance. I do not think that we're pleased with the ticket names. And so without some sort of enforcement, there's not going to be assurance, and so we have to develop that. And from my perspective at the moment, that assurance is going to come from the milk buyer who's going to enforce it and require those things. And and it's not going to be without expense. I can tell you the budget for our program isn't cheap, and that's the cost of us doing business to maintain consumer trust, because that Sarbanes-Oxley is a great example. We can spend a whole lot of money right now, or we can spend probably 100 times later. And so it's going to take boots on the ground and a lot of education and outreach. You know, I don't think it's fair to sort of come up with these rules and standards and expectations if we haven't gone out there and clearly communicated it with our dairy farmers to help them understand where we're at. And I don't think it's fair to just start stomping around farms. And you know, when Dean first hired me, we were interviewing, and I told him I had no interest in stomping around the countryside pointing out, you know, everyone's flaws. My husband says I'm pretty good at that, but it's not something I wanted to make a living doing. And so my intention was to help farmers do better. And I think if we look at it that way and incorporate the idea that we do need to have some trainers, I think there's a balance there. But it's not an inexpensive proposition. And I mean, that's just a fact of the cost of doing business today. Does that answer your question?